Ambassador, dear friends, let me begin by saying that it's really very good feeling to see all of you. I thank you for making time on a Sunday and spending it with me. It's really, for me, a very important, I would say, essential part of my visit. As the ambassador mentioned, I am here at a time when India and Sweden mark 75 years of their diplomatic relations. We first established those relations in 1948. It was the first Nordic country with which we had relations. I'm also here because we had yesterday something called the European Union Indo-Pacific Ministerial Forum. As you know, Sweden is currently holding the presidency of the European Union, and this forum, how European Union engages with the Indo-Pacific and in that context with India. This was something which started last year. It began in France. This was the second edition, so it was my privilege yesterday to deliver the keynote address for that meeting. We had, I think, close to about 75, 80 countries there. That, as well as I said, the 75th anniversary of our bilateral relations, these were the immediate reasons for my presence. Since yesterday afternoon when I arrived, I met the foreign minister, I met the defense minister, a number of other European ministers who are here. Tomorrow, before I leave, I will call on the Prime Minister, meet the National Security Advisor, meet with the Swedish business community. This, I thought, is something I should share with all of you. While it is, yes, it is certainly an important anniversary, but it also happens that on this anniversary, Sweden holds the presidency of the EU and we hold the presidency of the G20. And that, I would say, responsibility, the intersection of those responsibilities is something which is important for the world. And the fact that we, as two countries who have historically very good relations, very close relations, by our coming together, it's not just that we are, in a sense, benefiting each other, but there is a larger gain to the world because of the responsibilities that we hold at this time. Now, all of you live here. I mean, in a sense, your very presence, your daily life is an affirmation of the relationship between our two countries. But still sometimes it is good to remind people who are themselves so much in the midst of a relationship what the relationship is about. Because in a sense, you know, we take a lot of things for granted. We ourselves may be part of a process and may not be entirely aware of the enormity of it or the significance of it. And I want to say that, you know, for us, Sweden has historically been an important partner. It has been an important partner when it comes to political relations, certainly. We had Prime Minister Modi here in 2018. It's also been an important partner in terms of the larger Nordic grouping. In fact, at that time, we started some, group engagement with the Nordic Five, which the second edition of it we did in Copenhagen last year. Of course, from the Swedish side, we were privileged to receive His Majesty a few years ago. I think I can see a picture somewhere there. When I say that political relations are good, in practical terms, what it actually means is, it could be the United Nations, it could be other international organizations. We tend to think along similar lines. We we work together on important issues, we support each other. And some of that, for example, we can see in important initiatives, like there is an initiative that India and Sweden are co-leading on industrial transitions. This was something which Prime Minister Modi himself started with his Swedish counterpart then in 2019. So when it comes to issues like climate action, when it comes to issues even of development, because again, Sweden has a well-earned reputation in Europe as a country which has always been very sympathetic to what we call the global south, the developing world. So that political comfort has always been with Sweden, and visits like mine or that of my counterpart a few months ago to India, these do help to take that forward. But it's also exhibited in many ways where business is concerned. And that is something I think many of you here would know better than me. We have today almost 300 Swedish companies who have a presence in India. We have a growing number of Indian companies here. Now, we could, of course, say that 300 is not a good enough number today, given the growth rate in India. But certainly, my approach is to build on what is actually more than a century-old tradition of a business presence in India. There are companies like Ericsson or Swedish Match or SKF who have that kind of history doing business. And I certainly hope that in turn, our businesses here too are able to scale up their presence and set up the kind of collaborations which would make us an important player. We have, of course, when I speak about a good tradition, now, we are saying 75 years, I refer to 1948, but the fact is, in many ways, the relationship is very much older. And this morning, I had some time on my hands. I went to the Nobel Museum. It was a reminder there, of course, one, to see the various, displays regarding Indian Nobel laureates. But this is a land where, someone like Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore came more than 100 years ago. But the traditions go back much older. Yesterday, in fact, at the Indo-Pacific Ministerial Dinner, Foreign Minister Billstrom reminded us, I believe there's a very famous Buddhist statuette which is evidence of the fact that there's been a trade and a civilizational linkage for many, many years. So I cite all this because, as I say, this is a strong relationship. It's a relationship whose very steady growth, whose very solid foundation today offers us many possibilities. So, with those words, I want to share with you where we feel India-Sweden relations fit into, I would say, India's own growth journey. One, of course, as a very crucial member of the European Union, do appreciate that for India, when we look at key international partners, the European Union certainly is among the top partners. So among the top partners, a particularly influential country obviously has its own significance, and at a time when we are engaged with the European Union, we are negotiating a free trade agreement, we are negotiating an investment agreement, we are actually intensifying our technology cooperation. My own plans after tomorrow is to go from here to Brussels for what is the first meeting of something called Trade and Technology Council. So the role, the weight of the influence of Sweden in the European Union is something which is of great value. The second, within the European Union, within Europe, there are very distinct, I would say, groupings or regions or sub-regions, you could say. And here the Nordic Baltic grouping is one of great importance. And in fact, when I look back at the last decade, among the many innovations which Prime Minister Modi has introduced in our foreign policy, this kind of group engagement with countries is one of them. We've done it we had a tradition of doing it with Africa, but we're doing it with the Pacific Islands. We're doing it in other regions in South America. But in Europe, the Nordic one is particularly important, and in the coming years, we hope in some way to also try to capture the Baltic countries in association with that. The second is when I look at the kind of challenges that India would confront in its own growth and development. Again, Sweden and its capabilities and its strengths fit in very strongly with that, because when we grew, we will not have the I would say luxury or the kind of freedoms to grow in the manner in which other countries did 20 years ago or earlier. This is an era where climate sensitivity will be very strong. So our growth must necessarily, and I don't say this as a compulsion, I think our growth should, out of choice, be much greener, much friendlier, much softer on the planet. And when we look at that kind of, I would say, growth characteristic, here a country like Sweden, again, the technologies and the practices and the experiences of Sweden will surely stand us in very good stead. Another area where, again, there are very strong possibilities of further collaboration, of course, is the digital domain. Here again, there is a history. I mean, there are tech companies here, telecom companies here, where Sweden has established a reputation for itself, and certainly we in India see our growth as very much more digital than previous growths of major economies. So if you think of a world where, let us say, the next decade, in fact not decade, but 2 or 3 decades, and India grows, which is an India that is today the fifth largest economy. But this India is growing in much greener circumstances, in much more digital ways, much more intensively by use of technology. I think you can actually see that there is a fit here with Sweden. It's important that we explore those opportunities, and certainly in interactions with business, that is something which would be very much a focus space. A third area, and again, this is something all of you would empathize with, is that of the world as a global workplace. What is very clear is with each passing year, the demographics of the world is beginning to assert itself. And the demographics of the world is beginning to assert itself along with the demand for talents and skills. So, put very simply, where there is today demand is not necessarily where there is demographics. So, how the global economy actually deals with this gap, this is actually one of the big issues. And it's an issue because it's not just a demand-supply evening out issue. There are cultural issues here. There are mobility concerns. There is a question of, when large numbers of people move in one direction or the other. These need to be managed, and there needs to be the right framework, there need to be the right policies. But the fact is, we are seeing increasingly in Europe the openness today to look at the skills and talents of India. And one aspect of it, you could say, is yes, there is a demand. But one aspect of it equal is that Indians have established a global reputation. That Indian talent, when it goes outside, is able to fit in with the environment, with the work culture of other places. And, it may interest some of you to know, just yesterday, I actually concluded an agreement with Austria for mobility and migration. So it finalizes a regime by which Indians working in Austria get the treatment which they are entitled to, get the facilities and the protection which our people deserve. And we had done it. I had concluded a similar agreement last December with Germany. So this is a trend that we see happening. Certainly my hope would be that in due course we will see this particular aspect of our relationship with Sweden also advance. And as I said, when it comes to conducting international relations, doing diplomacy, in a wide variety of areas, there's a great deal of ease of working with Sweden. In fact, when I look at a forum like the United Nations, we have now for many years a tradition sometimes of moving resolutions in partnership with each other. There is in fact something called a humanitarian joint resolution, which we take turns moving, and this is one of the many convergences that we have. So I thought, as Indians who live here, or whether you're still of Indian nationality or you are settled in Sweden, you are all stakeholders in this relationship. It's important you know the developments in the relationship, the progress, the prospects of this relationship. So it's actually a very, I would say, a hopeful, positive picture that I'm presenting to you. I'm very confident that almost by any metric, this relationship will grow rapidly in the years to come. Now, having spoken about the relationship, it's also natural, when an Indian minister comes out and meets the community, that there is a desire to know what is happening at home. And I thought perhaps, my sense of that is also something which you will find of interest. And I would briefly again give you a kind of a domestic picture in India. It's a picture again, because I'm a foreign minister, I travel a lot, I look at other countries. So to some extent, what I say is a very comparative judgment of India and India before, but of India and other countries at this time. The last few years have been difficult for everybody. They've been difficult for everybody largely because of the COVID pandemic. No country, no society, I would say no family, probably no person, individual person has escaped the impact of it. It's only a question of how intense it has been, but it has, no question, probably been the most traumatic experience of our lifetimes. So when they call it a once-in-a-century happening, I mean, it's truly that. And when we look around the world, it has been difficult for many societies to recover from this. difficult in terms of, the emotional trauma, the social consequences of it, the economic damage that has been done, the health issues that have arisen. Today, that is actually a big overhang on the world. And when I look at India today, I have to very objectively really conclude that, relatively speaking, actually we have dealt with it in very effective terms. That yes, I don't know how many of you were able to visit India in the last few years, but even those of you who weren't in the more difficult waves that we had, you would have watched with concern. You would have had friends and family out there. Their welfare would have also been a factor in your mind. But the ability in India to respond to the challenges of the COVID, to create a public health response, to execute a vaccination program on such a large scale, to deal with the economic consequences, particularly on the informal sector, and then stage an economic recovery. This is something I think it's very important for Indians and the Indian community abroad to appreciate. Because in all honesty, not every country in the world can say this. There are still countries who are reeling from the effects of COVID. There were countries who really struggled with vaccination. There were people whose economic situation has become very precarious, in part because of the COVID, and you can see that even very close in our own neighborhood. So, if I were to today really assess the post-COVID recovery and I would say the psychological recovery for a society as well as the economic recovery, I think what is happening in India is very commendable, and it is actually a tribute to the resilience of our people. It is also in many ways a period when we have discovered that we are capable we are capable of really rising to a challenge. That if you look in terms of our contribution, as foreign minister, I have for me perhaps the largest source of goodwill in the world today is the fact that during COVID, when first we were big suppliers of medicines, but thereafter very big suppliers of vaccines. There are a very large number of countries where probably the first vaccines that they ever got from anybody was from India. And there are 100 countries today in the world almost who could say that. And I can tell you that it's had a very, very profound impact on our global image. The second big change in India is actually with regard to digital delivery. Digital delivery, in the sense, I'm sure everybody has an Aadhaar card. I certainly hope everybody has an Aadhaar card. But when it started, very few of us actually understood where this was going to take us. In fact, there's an interesting book. We put together a book. This was 2022, which was called Modi at 20. The purpose of the book was really, Prime Minister Modi had done 20 years in administration, elected as Chief Minister and as Prime Minister. So somebody came up with the idea that people who had been associated with him over these 20 years, who had observed him from different perspectives, who had met him, why don't we get a diverse set of people to pen their views? So I had the good fortune of being among them. But it was a very interesting I would say, very eclectic collection of people. So it had, sports stars like PV Sindhu. It had somebody like Sudha Murthy or Nandan Nilekani. Very few people from the government. So believe me, it's really worth reading. So now I mention that because in that Nandan Nilekani has a very interesting story. He says he's now talking. I'd say 15 years ago maybe, and he went around India and he said, I met all the chief ministers of India and tried to communicate to them what was the potential of Aadhaar, what you could do with Aadhaar. And he said the one person who got it then was Narendra Modi. He said, he gave it full attention, he really spent a lot of time. From the questions, the level of engagement, he understood even at that time what we could do in terms of digital delivery. And today, on the ground, I must tell you, it's actually been remarkable. It's been remarkable because if you look, we've had programs and schemes of various kinds. It's part of governance, it's part of development. But the same scheme, once it is, in a sense, put on a digital backbone, where there is a direct ability to give the benefit, to monitor the benefit, to ensure that it reaches the set of people it is meant for. The digital mode allows you to scale it up in a way in which it is unimaginable. And I go back to this COVID period because when COVID happened, one of our big concerns was, quite apart from the health aspect of the COVID, at that time, do remember we're talking maybe first quarter of 2020. First quarter of 2020, there were no COVID centers. We were running around the world trying to buy masks, PPEs, where actually nobody had even, or very few people other than in the medical field had even heard of PPEs or understood the importance of ventilators. Now, in all of this, there was also this concern that if you have a lockdown, if the informal sector is affected, if people are going back to the homes, what happens to them? How do you finance them? How do you feed them? How do you look after them? And one of our cabinet meetings, in fact, Prime Minister was very clear. He told all of us, go and study the Spanish flu. That if you see the Spanish flu, which happened about 100 years before COVID, a lot of people actually died not of the flu, but of the of the famine, of the shortages which accompanied a pandemic. And that he was absolutely determined he would not allow. So the COVID in many ways actually spurred the stress period of the COVID, actually encouraged us to sort of push digital in a way in which perhaps would not have been in our own minds, we would not have done it in the way in which we did. And the results today, because again, it was not something, the decisions were taken then, but there were a lot of preparation which had happened before. In fact, when in 2014, 15, 16, the first few years when Mr. Modi was Prime Minister, you will recall he pressed people saying, go open a bank account. Now, to a lot of people, it seemed a very inexplicable sort of push from the Prime Minister. I mean, he was actually telling people, even if you don't have money, go open a bank account. Now, that bank account, validated by the digitalization, but the fact that we have digital identities, actually enabled us to set up a financial support system, a food support system, and which actually was at the heart of seeing us through the COVID. That when 1/3 of the country 400 million people were actually receiving, regular payments from the government through this COVID period, when probably 2/3 of the country was getting food. This is really, in many ways, what saw us through the most acute stress period. But it's not just, I would say, a reflex response to a difficult situation. It's also, as I said, a way today of creating. I mean, you are living in Sweden, in a country which is famed for its social safety net. When in the 1970s and 80s, if you spoke in the world, which country has really created a society which has the ability to look after people, Sweden would have been a name which would come very naturally to people's minds. Now, traditionally, people thought that it's only high-income societies which can do this. So you are at, 50,000 euros per capita, yes, you can create a social safety net. Today, at $2,500 per capita, we are on our way. Yes, maybe not with that degree or that level of social safety, but the idea that there is universal health coverage, that there is mass housing, that there is universal pension, that farmers get support for their crop production, and each of these schemes, when you look at the kind of impact it is making, the numbers are 80 million here, 400 million here, 800 million there. This is in a way a very big change, and that change is having an impact on the population, because again, as a political person, when I travel around, I see on the ground not only the benefits of this, I also see how much the levels of confidence, the almost, I would say, also the legitimate expectation from people that yes, you are a government, yes, we expect this is what really we elected you to do, and that's actually having an enormous impact on the national mood. Along with that, there is another very important development which we call Gati Shakti, and Gati Shakti is again on an issue which all Indians we've long complained about, which is we go around the world and say their infrastructure is better than ours. Why aren't the roads working like this? Why doesn't the railway train run like this? Why doesn't the airport? Why isn't our airport as good as theirs? And that's changing. In fact, I often, when I travel, I make comparisons, but those comparisons now are less favorable to the places I travel to than about what is happening in India. And it's actually not just building infrastructure. It is about doing all of this in a planned, coordinated way. That because often one of our weaknesses was whoever was building the road, rail, airport, metro, electricity, each person was doing it very, very independently. And so in terms of efficiency of resources also, it wasn't the best way of doing it. So there is today, any of you going back to India, I guarantee you, whichever place you are from the point of landing to the place where you live, the one constant you will see is that there's an infrastructure activity which is taking place. And that pace of that, the impact of that, I go to the same place which I went 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And this is despite 2 years of COVID. That despite that, if you go back to your hometown or your home village or some place you are familiar with, and for sure you will see that change taking place. So at home, the kind of picture which I would present to you, again, I'm not in any way minimizing the challenges. We do have them. It is very important. We grow. We grow inclusively. How do you create the employment opportunities? The fact that if you have a young you reap a demographic dividend only if there are opportunities for the demographics to contribute, and most of all in employment. So all of that is there. But I think it's important today that you all appreciate living here in Sweden, that the national mood is a confident mood. We will have, of course, it's natural, we are a democratic country, we will have our debates, we will have our differences. There will be, all that people, in my walk of life do in politics. But the fact is, when you step back and look at India and, compare India to the India before, compare India to what is happening in other parts of the world, I would say to you, that there is today that confidence that we are on a sort of upward trajectory. It's not just I would say an elite confidence or a political confidence. I think it is there. Again, to me, one of the most remarkable shifts which I've seen is how deep, today the awareness is, how connected people are. That I am a member of parliament from the state of Gujarat, and I travel in Gujarat particularly to areas where I have developmental responsibilities, and a lot of these are actually relatively, today we call them aspirational districts. These are areas which historically were not very well developed. Many of them are tribal areas, but you go there today and see what that the power of the awareness generated by the phone, the communication, what it has done to people's psyche. There's really actually a kind of a revolution that is taking place. So that I thought were some impressions I should share with you. And finally, let me just conclude with one observation, which is, we are evolving, we are growing. As I said, we will have our debates. I mean, that's how societies progress. But it's important that our partners, our particularly important partners, have a good understanding of India. And countries develop understandings of other societies largely through their individual experiences. That if somebody in Sweden thinks about India, it's not, yes, certainly what they read in a newspaper or see in a television or look at social media, all these matter. But a lot of it is actually individual experiences. They relate a country, a partner, to a person. For them, their direct experiences, really in many ways determine their goodwill or otherwise towards a country. So for us today, the importance of the diaspora, of the Indian community, is in many ways my job is made not just easier. In many ways, you are all part of, helping me or sharing with me or partnering me in actually projecting the image of India, the personality of India. And it's through your activities and your achievements and your successes that we build these relationships. So I say this to you not as a formality. I do think that India owes a big debt to the Indian diaspora for actually helping to enhance our profile in the world, and I think it's only appropriate that I should express that also to you.